morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 21st edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I am David Aragona here with my usual co-host, Craig Mulkowski, looking back at the second jewel of the Triple Crown. It was Preakness weekend last Saturday. They ran the Preakness at Pimlico, and another upset as Seize the Grey was able to win for 88-year-old trainer Dwayne Lucas. Craig and I will dive into the Preakness, dissect plenty of the runners' trips in that race and what we saw in terms of the speed figures and implications for this three-year-old class moving forward. We'll also discuss plenty of the other stakes action that took place on that Preakness undercard at Pimlico on Saturday. Wet weather certainly influenced many of those results, especially with those turf races run over a very soft turf course at Pimlico this past weekend. We'll also discuss some of the stakes from the Friday card, Black Eyed Susan Day, as well as the Pimlico Special. Those were the two feature events on the day before the Preakness. Then we'll move on later in the podcast, talk about some racing from other venues. Churchill Downs ran the Louisville Stakes last Saturday. We'll discuss that, as well as some other races from that Saturday card, including the return of Disarm, who was second in the Travers last year. He made his return from a long layoff. We'll discuss his performance. Then moving on to Belmont at the Big A, where we're not going to talk about any of the stakes races, but some maiden and allowance races that I think are worth discussing from a speed figure standpoint. And then we'll finish things up with a race from Woodbine that earned a nice figure that is worth talking about. But Craig, another upset in a Triple Crown race as Seize the Grey was able to get the victory at, I believe, 9-1 in the Preakness this past weekend.
Yes, hats off to Wayne Lucas, and he's always seen wearing this hat, and I believe I heard he's 88 years old now, and the guy just keeps getting it done. Just amazing performance by Seize the Grey. He just really took it to this field early. We had talked about the race and thought maybe he'd be the one most likely to challenge the Bob Baffert trained horse, but it never really came to that. He just went right to the front, and he was the target all the way around. And it's not like he was up front crawling on the front end. I know on the NBC show, they put up those things that say it was a slow pace. I have no idea where they're getting that stuff from. It was definitely not a slow pace, in my opinion. We have almost all of the fractions coded in red, and nobody could catch him. I don't know how much of that was the wet track. Maybe that aided him a bit in being able to carry the speed as long as it did, but lifetime best speed figure for him, and a better speed figure by far than we saw in the Kentucky Derby. Mystic Dan basically replicated his effort there with a 118 and just a really strong showing. Not sure if this horse is pointed to the Belmont. I'm sure it'll be given consideration seeing that it's Wayne Lucas, but he took that step forward that we often see from 3-year-olds that can be hard to predict.
Yeah, I know. I had sort of a misconception watching this race live that Seize the Grey was setting a more moderate pace than he actually was. I'd kind of forgotten that the opening quarter in the Preakness always seems a little bit slow. I'm guessing there's not much run up for the 1 3/16 distance of the Preakness. So you typically see them speed up in the second and third quarters. And you could see that in the TimeformUS chart, red color coded pace figures for Seize the Grey at those second and third calls, those pace figs in the low 140s. That's really moving for the 1 3/16 distance. And he was just the best horse on the day. You could debate how much the muddy track influenced the result, Craig, and kind of going back through Seize the Grey's form. One thing that I had sort of noted, but maybe didn't take into as much account as I should have, was that this horse really seemed to relish a wet track when he got on it at Saratoga as a 2-year-old, breaking his maiden over a wet track at a big price. And then you might remember running deceptively well in an off the turf race where he blew the start, made a big run for third. I believe that was the Skidmore Stakes. Hadn't been on a wet track since then, but certainly appreciated getting back on it for this Preakness Stakes on Saturday. And as we're talking about it, I'll pull up the replay of the Preakness, and we can talk about the beginning stages of this race, correct? Because Seize the Grey was obviously ridden for speed. He was the one between the two Dwayne Lucas trainees that obviously had intention to get forward under young jockey Jamie Torres. And Imagination, you could see he's briefly sent from the outside by Frankie Dettori, but quickly, I think he became apparent that he wasn't making the front, and Bob Baffert had sort of tipped his hand before the race that maybe they were looking to rate Imagination, and it just gave Seize the Grey the opportunity to control this race. Controlled it through solid fractions. I'm not going to suggest that he was a lucky winner of this race, but you could just see he got into that comfortable rhythm, and it's always tough to catch a front runner, but it just seems like they're really comfortable setting the pace that they are up front.
Yeah, for sure. And we've talked about it often. A clear lead is probably more important than how fast you go. These horses sometimes get brave. I'm sure the muddy surface didn't hurt. And not sure what really was going on with Imagination. I mean, yeah, he was stalking, but he was also like wide around the turn for some unknown reason. Seemed to be a plan because there was no reason he couldn't move in. But that just gave Seize the Gray everything he needed on the front end, was able to get the job done. The others in behind ran fine. Mystic Dan and Catching Freedom basically matched their Kentucky Derby efforts, and then it was a big gap back to everybody else. I guess Imagination would be the big disappointment. I think he went off co-third choice or something like that and just never made the lead and had nothing left late.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into what trainers say before a race, Craig. I don't know if you were watching the NBC coverage, but that interview with Bob Baffert before the race, it kind of gave me the feeling like he thought the horse had no chance in the race. And I know that's quite a statement to make about a horse that went off at 4-1, but just wasn't getting a sense of confidence. And they certainly did not ride him with confidence. When Bob Baffert is feeling good about his horse's chances, they go to the front. And I think the tactics really said a lot about how this horse was viewed by the stable. We should talk about the second and third place finishers, Craig. Mystic Dan and Catching Freedom. We see them battling to the wire here in this replay. I thought Mystic Dan ran his race, just didn't quite get maybe as favorable a trip as the Kentucky Derby, when really everything worked out for him in a race where some others had a little more trouble than he did. But still, he ran right back to that Kentucky Derby speed figure. And I think he validated that he really is one of the best 3-year-olds in this class.
Yeah, he is. He ran fine. I know we both said we didn't really like him to win this race as a betting proposition, but I think we both expected him to run fine. He came back fine on the 2 weeks rest. I think Ken McPeak was probably blowing a little trainer speak our way with that one as a guy that runs his horses plenty. And I mean, the top 3 were all coming back on 2 weeks rest. Now, basically most of the horses in here that were considered contenders outside of Imagination and Tuscan Gold were those horses coming back quick, but it shows it can be done. I'm sure the argument will be made that it's not that horses can't run back in 2 weeks, it's what it does to them later. But these horses all ran fine and ran their race, and I hope we keep seeing them through the summer.
Yeah, Catching Freedom had no major excuse. He got a pretty good trip, like I hoped he would be. He wasn't out the back door. He was right there in mid-pack and swung out the top of the stretch, just didn't quite have enough to run down the top 2. Tuscan Gold felt like a horse that really didn't handle the track. You could see in the first half of the race, Tyler Gaffalione was already having to niggle at him. Just seemed like a horse that was never really traveling, and actually a credit to him and his stamina that he was even able to stay on for 4th in this race. Not too much to say about those that finished in behind. Hopefully, Just Steel comes out of his surgery well. I know he exited the race with a condylar fracture, and they'll be performing surgery on him. Hopefully that turns out well for Just Steel. But as for the other Dwayne Lucas trainee, the winner, Seize the Gray, Craig, nice to see them give a chance to this young rider, Jamie Torres, who did show a lot of promise when he came onto the scene in New York, has since tried his hand in Kentucky. And something that we often see from some of these older trainers, I know H. Alan Jerkins was somebody who used to do this quite a bit, just giving a chance to the inexperienced riders, not taking them off in the big races. And that's how jockeys like this turn into the Irad and Jose Ortiz's or the Joel Rosarios when they get these chances in the big races. Somebody's got to be the first one to do it.
Yeah, good for him. And to see his enthusiasm after he crossed the wire, I mean, that was just great to see. Sometimes you forget about these riders and the tough life that they have and the very tough job that they have. And just to see the sheer joy he expressed as the horse was crossing the finish line, I love to see it personally. So as a bettor and a guy that makes speed figures, sometimes I probably don't give riders enough credit, but it was great to see how much he enjoyed this. And hopefully it spurs him on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, I know. Dwayne Lucas, I mean, he is a living legend. Whatever you think about him, I know he's been a controversial figure for basically his entire time in thoroughbred racing, but it's pretty cool that somebody who was at the top of the game all the way back in the early 80s is winning a Preakness Stakes in 2024. Just that is some remarkable longevity for him at the top of the sport. And also with Seize the Gray being a My Racehorse, Craig, I mean, I know that there are various feelings about whether My Racehorse is a good investment or not, but in in terms of bringing people into the game and getting people excited about the game for a small investment, you've got to think it's at least a net positive for them. We view investments like this as horse players, and maybe, you're not getting the profit from my racehorse, but you're certainly getting the excitement when they send out winners of the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness Stakes in the past 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, good for them. I'm sure it's cool to be able to say, hey, I owned a piece of the Preakness winner. I don't know enough about it. I've read both sides of it. It doesn't seem like it's hurting anybody to me, and it's certainly helping some people get into the game.
I agree with that. More excitement about the sport is probably a net positive. Well, let's move on to some of the undercard stakes action from Preakness Saturday. The race run right before the Preakness was the Grade 3 dinner party, going the 1.1 distance over a very boggy turf course, Craig. You rarely see the one track condition rating used in TimeformUS. That's right there next to the soft course condition rating. For people that are not aware, the TimeformUS track condition ratings are on a 1 to 10 scale to explain how fast or slow the course is playing. And Craig, you could probably give better insight into this than I can because you created them. But this is a great example because I think early in the day, they were rating this turf course good before ultimately feeling some pressure to downgrade it. And this was definitely as soft as it gets.
Yes, it was. And it actually, it rained throughout the card. So I don't quite remember if it was a 1 early in the card, but it wasn't much higher if it wasn't. It was maybe a 3 or a 2 or something like that. I mean, this course was a total bog. It was raining, I think, during this race, if memory serves. And, it was just a matter of who was going to handle it. If you looked way back in Balnikov's PPs, back when he was in Ireland, he had won over a soft course. So he didn't really have any questions. He's obviously been running in California most of his career since he's come to the States. Occasional journeys back east, and he's run fine. So he seems to fit at this Grade 3 level when he ships east. Now, out west, he's more like a Grade 2, Grade 1 type at times. He's run fine in those races, but he fits in these kind of spots, and I think the ground certainly helped him as well.
Yeah, I certainly didn't love Balnikov in this race, but I thought he got a very good ride and trip. I believe this was Frankie Dettori on board. I'm not looking at the chart right now, but he saved ground early. I think one of the critical things to note when you're watching back the replays from this day at Pimlico is that, especially in the stretch for the final time, you didn't want to be right down on the rail. I think we saw that continue to play as a theme throughout this card, and especially as we got deeper into this card, and you could see Balnikov swinging off the inside in the stretch. I thought Irad Ortiz on running B, who ultimately finished third, did a good job of keeping the horse that seemed like his main rival early, Highland Chief, right down on that rail in upper stretch, and I think that didn't allow him to finish off the race with as much vigor as maybe his connections would have hoped. But when you've got a horse like Crabs and Beer finishing second in this race, Craig, at 14 to 1, I would have imagined he'd be a much bigger price than 14 to 1. But I think it speaks to the fact that you probably don't want to put too much stock in these results from the turf course at Pimlico on Saturday.
Yeah, Crabs and Beer, he's always going to take money in Maryland. Being from there myself, it's two of the favorite things you'll find in Baltimore. But yeah, we're going to talk about the turf races. I made speed figures the best I could. And when you go through the charts, they seem to fit, but they're not going to see a track that's a 1 condition rating almost assuredly. I think we saw it once at Parks last year. We're just not going to see it very often. So yeah, if Balnikov shows up on an off turf course, he runs fine, but it's probably worth looking at some of the trips. But at the end of the day, I just don't know how much it'll matter.
I agree. This is not a race that I want to put too much stock in. Beyond the top 4 finishers, you could see the rest just really didn't handle the course. Let's move on to another turf stakes from this card at Pimlico on Saturday. Race 7 was the Gallarette, going the 1.16 distance. And you could see, as Craig was noting, more rain fell in the second half of this card. So this only got a track condition rating of 2 out of 10 for the soft going that they found at Pimlico on Saturday in the Gallarette. And Fluffy Socks, Craig, firm or soft, I don't think it really mattered. She just laid over this field on paper, and she did what she was supposed to do.
Yeah, she was dropping in class quite notably. A lot of her recent races have been way in the 120s on the Timeform US race ratings. This one was only a 113 going in, and she just kind of had this field over a barrel. It came down to whether she could handle the turf condition. She handled it, and that was the end of it. She was just the best horse in the field.
Yeah, you could see through the stretch. It's just a hands and heels ride for my Rat Ortiz, as she always traveled better than these. She's a horse who had handled the wetter courses in the past, and it was just really no competition on to the finish line here. Not a whole lot to say about the rest in this one, Craig. Just a typical performance from Fluffy Socks, and the others are probably not graded stakes quality, at least at this point in time. Right before that, they ran the grade 3 Chick Lang for the 3-year-old sprinters over the dirt course, which was rated muddy at this point in the day. And I'm becoming a fan of this winner, Craig, Frost Free. He's just a really fast horse. They experimented with some things early on in his career. They tried rating him, I think, once in a sprint race at Oaklawn. He clearly resented that. He's a horse that just wants to run freely on the front end. They even tried going a 2-turn mile at some point. That's not for him. When they just concentrate on letting this horse use his speed in a sprint race, he's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, he proved that here. He's one when he gets to the lead and has things his own way. He can prove tough to run down. He's decent horse. He matched his speed figure of 113 that he ran last time in the Bachelor Stakes at Oaklawn. And just one thing I've noted is the Oaklawn dirt horses, and it makes sense because, I mean, they're given huge purses. When you win races at Oaklawn, you're generally beating competitive fields. It's really holding up as these horses ship around the country to other stakes races. So, yeah, I'm like you. I always like the speed horses that just go to the front, go as fast as they can, and make you catch them, and Frost Free is definitely one of those.
Yeah, the top two finishers in this race, Frost Free and Cats by 5, coming out of very similar races at Oaklawn Park, and they brought that form to Pimlico. Frost Free obviously having no trouble with the muddy track condition, as he does shift out a little bit in deep stretch here under a strong left-handed whip from Rat Ortiz. You can see him drifting out a little bit in the stretch and then back in once he switches the stick again, but he always had this race in the bag. I will say it was a good third-place finish from Mr. Skylight. You could see at the start of that race, he broke about a length behind the rest of the field. That was, I'm sure, not the trip that Riley Mott and the Connections wanted to get, because he is a horse who had showed much better tactical speed in the past. Maybe the result would have been different if he had broken well in the race, because he did put in a pretty strong effort to get up for third in here. But the way that it played out, nobody was catching Frost Free on the day.
Yeah, just one quick note as we're about to transition to, I think, another 6 furlong race. Just keep in mind when you see the times for these races at 6 furlongs, they are timing them from the gate now. They started that last fall, I believe. And so when you see a 23-24 opening quarter, Frost Free was really moving on the front end. You can see the adjusted fraction on our chart of 22.03. That takes into account that we're timing from the gate. So just something to keep in mind about the fractions you're going to see at Pimlico.
And timing from the gate does make sense in these 6 furlong races, because even as I pull up the replay for this Maryland Sprint, the next race we're going to talk about, you could see they really do start right at the pole. So there basically is no run up at all, just a few feet for these 6 furlong races. And speaking of the winner of this grade 3 Maryland Sprint, Craig, Super Chow, another race that was won on the front end, and probably a race that was decided right out of the gate, as Javier Castellano was extremely aggressive, making sure that Super Chow got to a clear lead, and nobody else could pass him after that. And I think the best thing to note about Super Chow is he did not show that tendency to drift out so badly on the stretch that we had grown accustomed to see in his prior starts in New York. He was much more professional in this race, and I think it helped make the difference.
It did for sure. I even was watching this race with my wife, Elsie, and as they entered the stretch, I said, okay, now watch Super Chow. He's going to drift out. And then she's just kind of giving me this weird look, because he ran about as straight as you could ask for through the lane. And like you said, it made a difference in how he performed. Both he was able to win the race, and he also ran the best speed figure we've seen from in a while, getting a 121 TimeformUS speed figure. So not sure what happened to correct the issues he's been having, but it has to be considered a good sign, I would think.
Yeah, it was a rider change for this race. I don't know how much that had to do with it. Mentally, this horse just seemed a little more dialed in. And you could see right towards the wire there, he starts the drift a little bit, and Javier corrects him, pulls on that left lane and straightens him up to the finish line. So good performance from Super Chow, Craig. A horse that I have to admit I probably downgraded a little bit more than I should handicapping this race, because I had just had a negative view of him after he drifted out so badly in the Carter in his prior stars. That was the race where Post Time was just able to catch him after he really did foul that horse through the late stages of that race. But the turn back to 6 probably helped this horse, and maybe the rider change also had something to do with it. Prevalence, I think he went off as the favorite in this race. A good effort. He backed up that victory at Keeneland against optional claimers in his prior start, but even at his ceiling, Prevalence is probably no more than a grade 3 quality sprinter. And I think that's sort of a theme that we saw through these undercard races at Pimlico, Craig. Not that it's some big surprise, but these races, these stakes races, just don't come up as tough as we see on the Derby Day undercard or the Belmont Stakes Day undercard. Unlike the horses running in the Preakness that are contesting the Triple Crown, there's not that pressure to run back in 2 weeks if you've already competed on Kentucky Derby Day. So we typically do see a little bit of a lull in quality in these undercard stakes at Pimlico.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I think these races are perfect for this day. They usually draw good fields, are usually pretty competitive. So, I mean, Maryland doesn't have the graded stakes arsenal that Churchill Downs and the Naira circuit have to put on that kind of card. And the way racing's conducted these days, very few top level horses would come back anyway, even if they did have grade 1s and grade 2s. The Preakness is kind of the exception. So I've got no issue with the undercard, but I get what you're saying. I mean, we're not going to see a lot of Breeders' Cup horses or things like that running on the undercard, but we may see a few that step up and are able to compete in better stakes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just making the point. I don't want to go over the top praising some of these horses. I know that there are a lot of eyes on the Preakness undercard, just as much as there are probably on the Kentucky Derby Day undercard, but I wouldn't necessarily view any of these performances that we've talked about, aside from the Preakness, as necessarily being horses that are going to be winning grade 1s in the future. Though maybe we could be a little more optimistic about the winner of the James W. Murphy, Craig, as we finish up Saturday at Pimlico by talking about this 9th race on the card, because Fulmineo is a horse that showed talent as a 2-year-old, didn't get the best trip when he tried the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, but this year they tried the dirt with him early on, briefly trying to get onto the Kentucky Derby trail. They've since gone back to turf. He's drawn wide post positions in a couple of races, including here, though I don't think drawing wide in this particular race was that much of a detriment, because I think you generally wanted to stay a little bit off the rail over this Pimlico turf course.
Yeah, he's pretty good. I thought he had ran well at Laurel last time in a race where the pace was just totally against him in an allowance race. He was the heavy favorite that day and not able to get the job done, but he was able to do it here. I thought it was a good effort. He got a 110 TimeformUS speed figure, so pretty competitive for a 3-year-old this time of year. I like his running style, and he seems to be a horse moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I do want to point out the runner-up in this race, Crystal Quest, who is the number 7. You're going to see it happen on the replay we're showing right about here. He's going to try to sneak up on through of the number 6. He's the horse in the red cap with the black sleeves and trying to make a move up the inside and get steadied right there. He really lost momentum at a critical point in the race. I think you could argue, given the trip, that Crystal Quest was probably the best horse in this race. And, you know, even after that trouble, I think it was Javier Castellano on steers him back over to the inside, which we really didn't see any horses making up ground right along the rail in the stretch of these turf races at Pimlico, especially on Saturday. So given the fact that he actually did re-rally to get up for second, you could argue that he might have been the best horse in the race, a runner that had really improved with the switch to turf and just getting a debut experience under his belt over the winter in Florida. So I think the top 2 in this race, they both have some quality. A 110 TimeformUS speed figure, that's solid for this level in May of the 3-year-old season. So I'll be interested to see where these go in the future. Let's now switch on over to the Black-Eyed Susan card on Friday at Pimlico, and we'll start by talking about that race for the fillies, won by Gunsong, who did go off as the 2-1 favorite, Craig. This not the most stellar edition of the Black-Eyed Susan, if I could put it that way. Just a lot of horses that were not coming out of the best races. Horses that didn't necessarily qualify for the Kentucky Oaks. I think there was only one Kentucky Oaks starter that came back in this race, that being Lemon Muffin, who was up the track in the Oaks. And it created an opportunity for some maybe second-tier horses to step up, and Gunsong was probably one of those. She was not nearly as good as Power Squeeze or Ways and Means in the Gulfstream Park Oaks, but had still run some of the fastest speed figures coming into this race and was able to get the job done, handling the 1 1/8 distance to win convincingly.
Yeah, it was fine. This is a race. It's a grade 2. I'm not sure if it's really been grade 2 quality for a few years now. And this is the kind of winner you're going to get. Gunsong is probably, in my eyes, more along one of the undercard winners on Preakness Day. Just kind of a grade 3 type filly. She's fine. She didn't get a very good speed figure for this effort, just a 103. So I'm not going to get too excited about this one.
Yeah, I would generally agree with that. She's a horse who I did think ran some nice races along with Leslie's Rose early in the year. Obviously, Leslie's Rose didn't show up in the Kentucky Oaks, but Gunsong was involved in that pace that came apart a little bit in the Gulfstream Park Oaks. This was her first start since then, and I just thought she finished up this race nicely. Like you said, it wasn't a particularly fast speed figure, but she could be a horse that's moving in the right direction for Mark Hennig, and nice to see Mark Hennig get a graded stakes victory like this. I know he's a very popular trainer in the game. A lot of people like to root for Mark Hennig, and good to see him get this victory with John Velasquez aboard, for an owner that's been with him at Lee Lewis for a very long time. I think he was saying that one of the owners that first gave him horses when he went out on his own back in the 90s. So nice to see loyalty like that rewarded over the long term. Move on to the Pimlico Special. This used to be one of the top handicap races in the country. These days, it's a grade 3 event going the Preakness distance of 1 3/16 miles on Friday, Craig. And there was a bit of an upset here as Cherie DeVoe capped off just an awesome Friday at Pimlico. I think this was her third stakes victory on the card, and we'll talk about the two others in just a bit. But Pyrenees causing the upset here over 3 to 5 favorite Kings Barnes. Pace of this race was extremely slow, Craig, and you might think that it would work in the favor of a horse like Kings Barnes, who had early position over Pyrenees early in this race. But sometimes when the paces are this slow, it can bring a closer into the race that maybe looked a little inferior on paper.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about it a lot. This is a race I had to use the P notation for making speed figures. It gave Pyrenees a 115, which was a slight upgrade over what he's been running in his wins. And he's been on a hot streak. This was his 4th race in a row since he came back from almost a year layoff to break his maiden. And the first time he's actually even had a close race. So he's obviously was a bit of an unknown quantity. He has some quality. Yeah, I don't get a horse like Kings Barn. If you're 3 to 5, why you're out there going a 50 half? I just don't get it. We had seen him run a lot faster at Keeneland last time in the Ben Li. And yeah, it's maybe Pyrenees is just a better horse. I don't want to take anything away from him because to overcome that slow pace is pretty impressive. But if I have the 3 to 5 horse with speed, I'm not going to go a 50 half. I can tell you that.
No, you could see how this race is playing out in the replay right here. Kings Barnes actually threw his head a couple of times into the clubhouse turn, probably wanting to go a little bit faster towards the front end. I get rating him off a horse like Harlow Cap, who showed some mild intentions to go forward, but you want to at least apply some pressure to that horse to make sure it's a truly run race. And I think Louis Saez was just a little bit too passive on Kings Barnes because you're putting yourself in a situation where you're only a length and a half ahead of Pyrenees, who is a horse who can get the distance and does have a strong finish. And I will say when they came into the stretch, and I'll just fast forward the tape a little bit, it does look like Kings Barnes really kicks for home and he's going to hold Pyrenees off. And I think you do have to give this Cherie DeVoe trainee credit because it looks like he's just going to settle for second or third right here. And he really kicks it into another gear to run this horse down in the last furlong. A strong finish going the 1 3/16 miles. So this horse does have stamina, but he's also got that finishing speed, which can be an equalizer in a race where they do go slowly up front. These tend to be run more like turf races.
Yeah, and I like the term you use, truly run race, because in my opinion, if you're the favorite, you want to truly run race because that's going to give you the most formful results. And it always is a head scratcher. It definitely hurt a couple horses in here. Red Route One would be one that I would say the pace hurt, but he often runs into that scenario. And it helped Harlow Cap, who was able to stick around for third. So not the worst edition of the Pimlico Special. I just wish it was run at a more honest clip.
Yeah, I think slow paces are going to be a bit of a theme on this podcast as we proceed through some races we talk about at different venues, Craig. Before we do that, though, let's finish up talking about Cherie DeVaux's excellent Friday at Pimlico. And maybe the most impressive of the winners that she sent out was the Hilltop winner, She Feels Pretty, who got the job done at 3-5. This was an expected result, but you still had to be impressed with the way this 3-year-old filly did it coming off the layoff. There's an argument to be made that she was the best horse in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies turf last year. I believe she drew post 12 that day, was wide around both turns, and still ran on well to be third, coming off the layoff here to make her 3-year-old debut. She took the kind of step forward that you want to see from 2 to 3, and then some.
Yeah, this was a really nice effort. It's hard to say. The field was a little iffy coming in, but I thought they ran okay, and she just absolutely crushed them. You don't see many 120 TimeformUS speed figures from a 3-year-old filly in May, so this is one with talent, and I'm with you. She ran very, very well in the Breeders' Cup to be third that day, and she's one that I personally would put right at the top of the division.
Yeah, she might be one of the best 3-year-old turf horses of either gender at this point in time. And you could see coming into the stretch here, John Velasquez just has a handful of horse. She always traveled well into the race. And I love to see that when a horse makes the front and the ears prick. They just go right up, and then he sets her down again and the ears go right back. And she realizes, oh, got a little more running to do as she strides out to the finish really nicely. And, Craig, interesting pace color coding of this race as we look back at the chart, because the early pace did get, I believe, a red color coding for the first quarter mile, and then they really backed it down. You could kind of see the whole field slowing down in the middle portions of the race to get a couple of blue color coded splits. And then I think it was She Feels Pretty who sort of created that blue color coding, because she was the only one that came home as fast as she did. And you can kind of see that dip in the pace figure line for her from 134 down to a 106, back up to a 116. Didn't see too many horses coming home in sub 24 seconds over this Pimlico turf course.
No, that was really impressive. And I don't think those pace figures are wrong. We had a long shot who went out to the lead and just kind of backed it in, but she feels pretty worked early in this race. It's not like she was way off the pace. I think she was only 4 lengths back, running that 130 pace figure, as you say, and to still have that kind of finishing kick over a course that wasn't fast. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't Saturday's course. The track condition rating for this one was a 5. I would term that more of a yielding than a good, but the finish as strong as she did was just super impressive. And I'm excited for this one.
And then we'll finish up Cherie DeVaux's big day with her winner of the Allaire DuPont Distaff. This was Shotgun Hottie, a 5-year-old mare, Craig, who had really burst on the scene last summer when she caused that minor upset over a good field in the Molly Pitcher at Monmouth. Unfortunately, came out of that race with a problem, was off for a long time, came back this winter at Oaklawn Park, and it just seemed like she needed to race into fitness. Each performance was a little better than the next one, but wasn't able to be successful in those races, was 4th in the Apple Blossom when last seen in April. She was obviously facing a softer field here, getting bet down to 4-5, but this did feel like another step back in the right direction for a mare that did show real talent last year.
She did, and you could see, like you said, she was racing at Oaklawn Park, and she didn't show up really in her first race, but she just kept improving and improving, and she improved all the way to a 120 speed figure, just really dusting this field. And I mean, no, it's a listed stakes, I think, doesn't even have a grade. There were some pretty solid fillies and mares in this one, all capable of like 105 to 110 TimeformUS speed figures, and she completely blew them away. So she lived up to the 4-5, and good performance from her. And I would think she is one that could move up in class.
Yeah, I think just given the trajectory that she's on, I won't be surprised if she's able to step up against some tougher company in the future. She does feel like a filly, or I should say a mare, that really relished this 9 furlong distance. I know she only tried it once as a 3-year-old in the Gazelle when she was closing for third at a big price, and I think she's not gone farther than a mile and a 16th since then. She feels like one that just wants to run all day. I know there aren't too many races going a mile and a quarter in this division anymore. There used to be more. I wonder if they'll try to wheel back in 3 weeks in a race like the Personal Ensign on the Belmont Stakes undercard at Saratoga. Of course, that would be a mile and an eighth around 2 turns this year, and feels like that could suit a horse like her. And I'm not sure exactly who's going to show up for that race, Greg. This feels like a division that's still a little bit in flux at the moment. Obviously, Idiomatic, she was the queen of these last year and seemed like she came back in top form at Churchill Downs on Derby weekend. But beyond her, I think some others still are waiting to step up into that void that was maybe left by some retirements, some horses that turned 3 to 4 this year and still need to take that step forward. So won't be surprised if Shotgun Hottie pans out to be one of the better ones in this division. Let's move on to a different venue. We'll discuss some racing from Churchill Downs last Saturday. And we'll begin with the feature race on their card. The 7th race was the Grade 3 Louisville. This one going the 1.5 mile distance on the turf, Craig. And I feel like we've seen this before, where Mike Maker claims a horse that was sort of a conventional router and stretches out to a marathon distance for the first time. That was the case with Segoy, and the horse runs a career best to earn a graded stakes victory first off the claim.
Yeah, he does. And it's kind of funny to say. I think Mike Maker had entered 4. He ran 3. This one was 19 to 1 and was the shortest price of all the Mike Maker horses, and actually got the job done pretty easily. And it's a race where he just went to the front. Julian Leparoux took him right to the front, and really, he was never challenged. He got briefly challenged at the top of the stretch by Strong Tide, the horse who had been tracking him all the way around, and just was able to fend him off pretty easily. So who knows? I imagine we'll see this guy show up in another 11 or 12 furlong race, and he looked pretty good in this one, that's for sure. I think it was his first try going this long. He had run at shorter distances in the past. It's a career best TimeformUS speed figure, and his best number prior had come at 1.25 miles on the synthetic. So maybe that's what Mike Maker saw when he reached in to claim him.
Yeah, this horse had been in very good form at the start of his 7-year-old season. This was his 4th victory in a row. He had now won 5 of his last 6 starts. So he had been in good form prior to coming into Mike Maker's barn, but we see Maker do this so often. He identifies a horse that might have that propensity to go a little bit longer, and they just thrive when they're asked to do it under his care. And this is a horse that has shown ability in the past. He's run some big speed figures going back, seasons ago in his past performances. But like you said, had never gone the marathon distance, and he really seemed to respond well to it. I think being forward in this race definitely helped Craig. It was a very steady pace throughout. I think we should verbalize the TimeformUS speed and pace figures because they're not showing up in the chart just yet. A 120 TimeformUS speed figure for Segoy, and maybe you can lend some insight into what the pace figures look like. But I did think it was a race that was a little bit of a merry-go-round towards the front end, and maybe that worked against the 4th place finisher Bold Act, who went off as the 3 to 5 favorite, Craig, though I'm starting to think that Bold Act is just his own worst enemy because this horse refuses to settle early in his races. He gets off a little bit slowly, that he wants to make this premature move, getting rank under his rider. That's just not tendencies that really suit American racing well.
No, particularly not at 1.5 miles. I mean, maybe this horse needs a turn back in distance. I don't know. He's had success going longer before, but it doesn't seem to be working now. 120 for Segoy was his speed figure. The pace, a couple of the fractions are coded in red, not the first one, but the second and third. I think they're like the 1 mile and the 1.25 mile fraction. So he was going a steady clip. The pace figures are about 7 to 10 points higher than the final time figure. So good effort for him. I wouldn't upgrade him too much because of the pace. He didn't get any upgrade on the figures. So, it's one, maybe if he gets challenged, things will be a little tougher, but he certainly handled the distance just fine.
Yeah, watching Florent Giroux's ride on Bold Act, it reminded me of that video that was going around social media a few years ago, where Florent was trying to control a horse that was running off on him at Saratoga in the jockey's room after Junior Alvarado was kind of showing him how to build stronger arms. That's a good one if people have not seen it before. But yeah, an unenviable situation for Florent on Bold Act, because there's not a whole lot you can do when you've got a horse that just wants to run off on you every step of the way in a 1.5-mile race. And that was unfortunate for him. But Bold Act, a horse that I think you want to be careful with moving forward, even though he's had some tough trips now twice in a row. Craig, another race that we have to talk about, not because of the speed figure that it earned, but because of the horse that won the race, was Disarm in the 4th race of the day at Churchill on Saturday. It was a 1.16 allowance affair, and obviously this horse had gotten really good during his 3-year-old season. He was the runner-up in the Travers last year behind Arcangelo, getting all the way up to a 125 TimeformUS speed figure. Looked like a horse that was going to be knocking on the door in top races at the end of the season, like the Breeders' Cup Classic. Unfortunately, he went to the sidelines with an injury, was off for a long time, but was able to make it back, launched his 4-year-old campaign this past Saturday. And I don't know if we learned a whole lot with this return effort.
No, we definitely didn't learn much of anything other than I guess he's healthy and can still run, because this was a horse who had hung up some 120 plus TimeformUS speed figures. I think all of his last 3 races in 2023 hit that number or exceeded it, finishing with a 125 in the Travers. He's only getting a 98 for this one, and that's with a pace upgrade. The final time figure was a 94, but I would say you can probably just go ahead and put a line through this race and treat it like a workout for him. It's one where we gave it the pace upgrade that we did, but we just couldn't go too far because it would have made all the horses who were grossly overmatched in this field. If he ran to his numbers, we would give them inflated numbers. And I just couldn't see giving horse 3 of the 4 horses in the field too high of a number, having people trusting those numbers and betting those horses back. So I just rated the race the way it went with a slight pace upgrade. I mean, to give you a indication of just how slow it was, Disarm set the pace, and his first 2 pace figures were 47 and 46. There's simply no way to run a fast race after that. It's not like there was a small sample. I think they ran 5 dirt routes on this card, maybe 4 at the same exact distance. So it's, like I said, I'm putting a line through it. I'm treating it as a paid workout, and we'll see. It's a horse that if he took a lot of money next time, I'd probably take a shot against him, because we really don't know how he came back.
Yeah, I know sometimes you throw around these pace figure numbers, Craig, and obviously if you're a user of TimeformUS on a regular basis, you have context for what they mean, but to just contextualize what a 40 pace figure really means, the way that I like to think about it is a horse that runs a 40 pace figure early, that means he's sort of on track to run a 40 speed figure. That's if he kept a consistent pace throughout the race. That's the sort of pace that Disarm was setting, the kind of pace that you would need to set if you were, well, I don't want to disparage any horses, but let's say competing at a racetrack that you've never heard of before. He really did have to speed up in the late stages, and it would just be impossible to run a fast speed figure off those kinds of fractions early in the race. And when you watch the replay, you could also see that Disarm didn't even know he was in a race. I mean, he literally had his head bowed around the clubhouse turn like he was out for a morning gallop. And I think that's where experience comes in with Keith Asmussen. You sort of have to know how fast you're going. And while you do want to back down the pace a little bit, there's a big difference between going to 50 to the half and going 52 to the half.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And just for context, I know there's people who listen who probably don't use TimeformUS. A pretty rough guide is that our figures are generally about 20 points higher than speed figures. So just picture of a horse this good, Disarm, who's capable of 100 by your speed figure, set a pace figure of 20 or 25 or whatever it was. I mean, it's almost impossible to get the horse to run that slow. I think that's probably about as slow as he could possibly go.
And let's talk about one more race from Churchill Downs before we move on to another venue. That was the second race of the day, a 1.16 turf event for maiden special weight runners. And Pretty impressive winner here, Craig, in the 3-year-old Green Light. This was a horse who had gotten on the turf for the first time at Keeneland in April in the second start of his career. And watching back that race, probably not Flavien Prat's finest ride, as he made a premature move down the backstretch and around the far turn on a horse that was traveling like he was going to win, and then maybe moved a little too soon and got run down in the late stages. No moving too soon here. I mean, he took the lead at the top of the stretch and just continued to widen from there. And anytime a horse wins by 10 lengths on the turf, especially when it's a firm turf course, it signals that you got a pretty talented runner on your hands.
Yeah, this horse just took a giant step forward. I don't remember how Rudolph Brissett does with first-time starters, but I know on TimeformUS he was rated pretty high second time. So a jump for, well, actually, he wasn't a second-time starter. It was second-time turf, but he took a big step forward this second time. It was one when I sat down to make the speed figures. I had to go back and look and see because, I mean, I'm not really in the habit of giving 3-year-old colts as big a speed figure as he got for this effort. He is going to wind up with a 118 for it, but it checked out. And if anything, I was on the conservative side. There was another turf route run at a mile. I kind of treated those two races separately because rating them together just gave some numbers for both races I wasn't happy with. But I don't think there's any doubt that this horse just ran an absolutely monster race. It's not like the pace was slow. It was pretty solid early. It was an even race throughout. And the others in the field just couldn't keep up with them. And they were all horses, like all the horses in behind them had run in the mid 90s in the past and basically ran that here. He just was way better than they were. So stakes have to be in his future really soon.
Yeah, this is a horse with definite stakes potential on the turf. He always traveled strongly in this race and finished with the kind of energy that maybe he was lacking in the prior start when he moved a little bit too soon, but really seemed to benefit from that experience here. Behind him, it was not a strong field. I mean, when you win by 10 lengths, it has just as much to do with your ability as it does who is behind you. But the number that you gave for this race, Greg, I was looking in, the charts, when you earlier in today, and some horses that finished in behind him, they got numbers that certainly make sense for them based on the prior form. So just a superb effort from the winner, Green Light. Let's now move on to Belmont at the Big A, and I want to talk about a few races from there last weekend. We will skip over the stakes on Saturday. That was the Vagrancy going the 6.5 furlong distance, but I actually want to mention a different race run at 6.5 furlongs on this card that we think went faster than the Vagrancy. The times that you see officially in the chart indicate that it was just a tick slower than the Vagrancy, but those are hand times. That'll be indicated if you look in the DRF chart and formulator. I don't know if we have something in TimeformUS that indicates a hand time or not, but when the speed figures do show up, the T notation will be next to these, indicating that this was a race with a timing error, Craig. And I know you timed this one for video, and you can vouch for how fast this race was.
Yeah, this race was definitely I don't remember what the exact time was, but I know I made the figures off of it, and he wound up with a 113. It was faster than the stakes race for sure. It was not a hard race to time. For some reason, I collaborate with Equibase and have for years. Every other circuit in the country, when there's a problem with the racing, will change the times to what we get from video, which, make no mistake, they're not perfect to the 100th of a second, but they're probably within a 10th of a second at worst. So I don't know why. Well, I do know why NYRA would very much like to use the times that we provide, but there's some statute in New York that the state steward is in charge of timing, and he simply won't change them. He goes with his times, no matter how bad or ridiculous they may be. I think in this case, he was about 3/5 of a second too slow, if memory serves. I think 0.59 was the number. The fractions were even more egregiously off. So luckily, I know Bayer gets the same report. So if you're using DRF products, we're using the correct times, not what's in the chart. And this was a very fast race for a maiden. Both the top two ran very well. It was one where, the speed figures kind of jumped out because it was a big jump for both, but they were also 9 lengths clear of the third place horse, a horse who has been running pretty good figures as a maiden. There was at least one other 6.5 furlong race on the card. So I think the speed figure is totally legit.
Well, I'm glad you gave that context about how trying to correct times works in New York, because I know there can be some confusion about that. I won't rehash it. I think you summed it up perfectly. You did email me the times, Craig, so I'll read them off. The actual fractions that you got from video were 22.39, 45.11, 108.94, and a final time of 115.32, which would make this about half a second faster, or a little more than half a second faster than the vagrancy. So the 113 Timeform US speed figure that this race got with just a slight pace downgrade, really strong number for a 3-year-old, especially a 3-year-old New York bred. First time going out for the Brad Cox barn off the long layoff. Obviously, this one took a big step forward. Vetriano, the winner. I don't know if I mentioned his name yet. A horse that I remember last summer at Saratoga when he debuted for Chad Brown as a 2-year-old. There was a lot of hype around this horse. He had been working well, got bet down to a short price on debut and didn't show up, but given the long layoff, perhaps something went wrong out of that race. He showed his true talent second time out, and I'll be interested to see where he goes from here. There is pedigree to go longer. He's by Liam's map. He's a half-brother to a horse named Grantham, who I think was stakes placed going route distances on dirt and or synthetic. So Vetriano might have a real future in the Cox barn. Discuss another race from Belmont at the Big A last week. I'll go back to Friday's card, and we'll mention the 7th race of the day, which was an allowance optional claimer. This one, or I'm sorry, the 8th race of the day. This one was won by Turf King, a Chad Brown trainee who's been pretty lightly raced up until this point. Collected a stakes victory at Woodbine last summer over the synthetic course. Was off for a long time after that. Came back in a race at Gulfstream Park. It was the Canadian back in March, and I think we did the forecast for that card, and I think I liked this horse that day, Craig. And I remember thinking he didn't get the best trip. He got held up in traffic in upper stretch, probably never had a chance to do his best running that day, but now second off the layoff, got a much better trip this time under a perfect ground-saving ride from Trevor McCarthy.
Yeah, he did. I thought this was certainly a nice effort from him speed figure wise. He's going to get a 124 in here. There were some really nice horses. Grand Sonata and Big Everest are horses who have consistently run right around that 120 or better mark. So just a good effort from him. We've talked about many times on our Pacecast, once the Gulfstream meet ends, you might want to give excuses to horses who have the kind of running style that Turf King has. And I think it kind of showed up here. He seemed to enjoy this course. Now, he didn't get the greatest trip at Gulfstream, as you said, but that kind of trip is almost impossible to overcome there. And he's just a horse who was probably always going to like these more East Coast, northern tracks more than he would Gulfstream Park.
Yeah, and he's a son of Kingman. It feels like a lot of these progeny of Kingman just improve over time, not always ready to deliver their best as 3-year-olds. And it seems like Chad Brown is really willing to take his time with especially the male Kingmans that come into his stable. We've seen a lot of them thrive after some long layoffs, coming back in the later stages of their careers. I think of Domestic Spending. It's hard to keep all these Klarovich names straight. I think it was Domestic Spending was the very good turf horse from a few years ago who competed at the grade 1 levels and won those races after coming back from a long layoff, I believe, as a 5-year-old. So Turf King, we'll see if he turns out to be that good. But 124, a strong speed figure for a horse that was coming back just second off a layoff as a 4-year-old. Let's dial it back to Thursday. Let's talk about one more race from Aqueduct, or the Belmont at the Big A meet. This was the 6th race on the Thursday card. And speaking of firsters that have a lot of hype, well, this one delivered. Donegal Momentum, a 3-year-old debut runner going out for the Tom Morley barn. This horse had been coming in showing a 45 and change half-mile workout from the gate about a month before this start. And when you see that kind of workout in the form, typically suggests these horses have quite a bit of speed. And this one definitely does, Craig, though this race did not feature a particularly fast pace, and most of the speed that Donegal Momentum showed was in the final quarter, not the first quarter.
Yeah, he flew home. This is a race that has all blue fractions in the TimeformUS chart. The pace figures early were in the upper 80s, but he flew home to get a final time speed figure of a 113. We adjusted the overall number a little bit because of the pace. He wound up with a 108. it was actually an adjustment to increase that number a little bit and not penalize him as much as he would have been if we just used a straight algorithm. And the horses in behind it made perfect sense. So I think this horse is one who's very good. We're going to see what he has going forward. But Tom Morley has a nice 3-year-old. I don't think he's a horse who generally does all that well with first-time starters. So I wasn't watching this day. I wonder if the barn was surprised. I'm guessing not. He was 7-5, but it makes you wonder when a guy who doesn't win first out unveils one like this.
No, this was no surprise. They liked this horse a lot. And I mean, you could see coming to the stretch. I mean, he is just a quintessential Uncle Mo with that long, loping stride. I mean, the way he hits the ground, it's just, I mean, he is Uncle Mo through and through. That is his sire, of course. There's actually a lot of turf pedigree on the dam side of this pedigree, but clearly he handled this muddy dirt track. And it should be pointed out, this was a muddy sealed track. So maybe make of that what you will for this horse moving forward. But I mean, he was just better than these on the day. I mean, he came home his final quarter, just talking about raw times, in 23.39. You're not going to see too many closing fractions like that, especially over a track that had a 6 track condition rating on the dirt. So clearly a runner with real potential. I'll be interested to see what they do with him from here. Obviously, this is the kind of horse that you would be thinking about stakes almost immediately after this debut. Will they try a first level allowance race? Will they try to go right on for a race like, I don't know, the Dwyer that I guess will be run at Aqueduct this year? Definitely some options open to this one, but based on the way he finished this race, I'm not sure that he won't be able to handle some added ground down the line. And let's finish things up with one more stakes event for the 3-year-olds, but heading up to Canada and Woodbine for their Saturday feature race, which was the Ruling Angel for 3-year-old fillies, as I switch over to the Woodbine chart, the track we don't navigate to that often. And Wit Vaughters Rand was a 3-year-old filly trained by Mark Casse. Just seems like one of these, Craig, that is a real synthetic specialist, because they tried dirt and turf with her over the winter in Florida. Neither one seemed to suit her that well, but she showed a lot of talent on synth as a 2-year-old, and getting back to synthetic now as a 3-year-old, she picked up right where she left off last year at Woodbine.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive. She's now 3 for 4. And what caught my eye is when I was making the speed figures, well, actually my assistant made these speed figures, but when I processed them, this one came back really big as a 119. So really strong effort for a 3-year-old. And also, I think it's kind of note the way that she did it. She was a horse who generally was up on the pace last year or pretty close. And the one time she routed, she was still up close. She dropped back to 7 furlongs. So maybe her speed was dulled a little bit from that turf try, but it didn't seem to matter as she just was able to blow the field away in the lane, winning by 4 with that huge speed figure. So, I don't know if I totally write her off on dirt. She had a little bit of a tough trip at Gulfstream, and maybe I'd give her another shot. I didn't like what I saw from her on the turf, which just kind of shows the conventional wisdom. It isn't always right that synth is more like turf. I think horses are individuals, and at the end of the day, maybe you're right, and she is just a synthetic horse. I imagine she'll probably stay in Woodbine for a while if she's getting these kind of results.
Yeah, no, this was a really impressive performance. Like you were saying, not a lot of pace, but the way that she was able to finish was very impressive. And yeah, I mean, there are plenty of races for her at Woodbine. I was just looking up to check and make sure. She is not a Canadian bred, so she's not eligible for races like the King's Plate or anything like that. But Mark Casse does like to keep these horses with synthetic tendencies up at Woodbine and take advantage of all the stakes they have to offer, even for the Kentucky bred. So she should have a future in those races. And based on what we saw from her as a 2-year-old, Craig, at a distance is not supposed to be a problem. I think she won a stakes going 2 turns in that 109 TimeformUS speed figure that you see showing in the chart towards the end of her 2-year-old season. So definitely one that should be able to go farther. And the way that she finished off this race would also lead you to believe that more distance probably is going to be better for her. Well, that brings us to the end of our rundown to recap this past week's racing that included the Preakness Stakes, but plenty of other stakes action. And Craig, I'm starting to get excited for what's to come for the rest of the year. Once we start to get through the Triple Crown, I mean, the Derby and the Preakness, I mean, it just seems like they come at you in quick succession. Now we've got a little bit of breathing room before the Belmont Stakes, but really looking forward to that Belmont Stakes card at Saratoga. And beyond that, it's just going to be a month until the Saratoga meet starts. And just feels like this is the time of year where there's a lot to look forward to in the horse racing world.
Yeah, when the news first broke, they were going to run the Belmont at Saratoga. I remember it was just kind of a, yeah, whatever, it's fine. I didn't, but it's approaching. I'm getting more and more excited. And it's not just for the Belmont Stakes. It's mostly for the undercard. I mean, we always just get such high quality racing. We get top horses shipping in from everywhere. And I just really can't wait for it. I know we're still almost 3 weeks away, just a little bit short of that, but it's just one of the highlights. It's kind of a mid-season Breeders' Cup, and really looking forward to it. I did want to mention, I know you're going to be on vacation the rest of the week, so probably not going to be a forecast this week as I'm filling in doing the morning line for you on the NYRA circuit. So I'll be a little bit busy, but hopefully we'll be back next week with a recap of any of the racing. I really haven't looked ahead to see what the big races are. I think Churchill has a big card, but we'll be back next week to discuss these and hopefully have a forecast next week.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I'm glad you mentioned that. A little bit of housekeeping. Yes, I will be off for the second half of this week, so Craig will be covering those morning lines. I believe it's the Saturday through Monday cards as they're running through Memorial Day weekend at Aqueduct this upcoming week. So a little bit of a break for us in terms of the podcast, but looking forward to getting back into the action next week. And Craig, one of these days you're going to have to teach me to make speed figures because you do these favors for me with the morning line, though I worry that if you teach me too much about making the speed figures, you might create a monster. So we'll see if that's a positive or a negative for you down the line. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to the TimeformUS Pacecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get these podcasts, make sure to check out and subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel and DRF.com. Everybody, thanks for tuning in this week. Craig and I'll be back in about a week's time.